So let's see. So yeah, there's distortion and glitching effects. There's a wide variety of these. There's also like saturation. So I think some of the loops have like specifically are targeting people who are trying to go for these kinds of effects. I mean, there's really no end to the kinds of things you can do to a piece of video that's interesting, especially when you're not trying to be realistic. You know, if you're like listening to EDM and you want like these colors to just go like at a rave, like basically it's rave technology. But it's not just for EDM, right?
Yeah.
But like the most wild and extreme examples are going to occur. Yeah, well, you could. There's nothing saying that you can't run Chopin through a live audio like Resolute. There's nothing that says that. You might struggle to find especially like jarring, like whoa, I did not expect that moments, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't do some fun things. Oh, you totally could get some wild, unexpected moments with Wagner. So yeah, and then I noticed that I said skip. But yeah, so the idea, this is 2D. So the way I'm like right now thinking of possibilities of putting just existing 2D technology into 3D space is kind of just the sky, right? Either the sky and you just have a bunch of, because what it is essentially squares usually, squares, and then you paste those squares onto walls in your live arrangement. When you might remember, we went to a house show and like in the basement, like at Samber's place, he had like one of these things that we could play with, but we're not really in a state to actually do it informed way, but like it like people can just play with these, which brings me to another thing, which is imagine if like some of these parameters, in addition to like music, like you can just switch, you just give that kind of control to the player, which is a lot of fun. It's really fun to play around with these toys, basically. Even if you don't know what you're doing, in some cases you can still see the changes you're making if you like simplify the tools and it's like flip the switch. You flip it and you're like, whoa, it transforms the sky color, or not even the sky color, but like various like environmental sphere kind of things. You could even try and like paste these 2D things onto textures. You could do that, depending.
Make it 3D?
Well, can you imagine trees that look like bark, but as the music gets more intense, they like pulse different colors, you know? Or maybe there's like a couple. There's a couple of like specific parts of the tree that kind of glitch out like occasionally to the beat. That's like an example of 3D assets, which I'm going to transition to right now. Excuse me. There's this thing called Tilt Brush. It's a painting tool in VR. It's really cool. It's developed by Google. They recently came out with this thing called audio reactive brushes, which is like a bunch of like preset audio reactive 3D models that like when you run music through your speaker, by the way, you don't control frequency bands with this. It's just the full song, the full track frequency kind of range. I don't know exactly what kind of calculations go into whether they favor the bass more, which they probably do because it's a lot more noticeable when you link something to the kick. Right? It's kind of the most obvious kind of place to weight your like standardized audio reactive thing. But they've got animations on these brushes, so for they've got some really interesting ones, and there's a good place to look for inspiration, because people are using this to create like nightclubs in the Wave VR. This is one of the tools they're using in order to make, oh my god, like really cool spaces to be listening to music, right? There's still some limitations, but it's already pretty cool and advanced. So I'm going to have a couple of examples that they use. I'm going to just describe them with words because, but if you go onto the presentation, in the notes is basically the trailer that I based all of this on. You're going to see this. So one is it separates your strokes. So like when you do this and then you rapidly change direction, it segments that stroke separately and then it goes into a new direction. And what it does is it has this animation that like it's like you're plucking a string, and like boing, and it vibrates, but it stays in the air, right? It doesn't take the whole segment, but along this bent thing. If it bends too far, of course, it would look weird. So when it bends too much, it creates a new segment, and that's a new string that you're plucking, and it's not just back and forth. It's got weird wiggles. I mean, they've done a really good job in the animation. It gets really difficult to paint with things that move back and forth but still look good. So they've done a really interesting job. They've approached this in a really interesting way. There's another one which is it creates a flashing. It's like a Christmas light. So it creates a flashing point every unit of distance that your paint goes. So you can basically draw a chord along which lights are. And this is expanded upon a little bit more in the way they segment distance of your paint. There's another one which is just shakes the actual model physically back and forth. It is basically glitching out. It's really you have to check out this trailer because there's some really interesting kind of paints they use, and there's some room for creativity. There's already people using them. There's lights or items or objects that continue along the path you draw to the beat of the music. Again, this is because it's fully just the whole track, just all the frequencies, so to the kick. But you could, if they made it so that you could define a frequency spectrum, you could have some lights move to the kick and some move to the snare, and you could change that, and that'll be a really interesting kind of thing. And there's ones that there's particle effects. So if you know what particle effects are, they're just a bunch of glowing orbs or whatever.
No idea.
So you get them a lot in video games. It's ooh, spooky tingling lights, and things. But usually they're assigned to an animation cycle so that they look realistic. Yeah. But in this case, when you draw them, it throws up this spray of there's this area where lights appear is what it ends up being, and then the animation changes speed and brightness based on the music. So not only do the lights flash to the beat, the individual particles, they also generate and go through their life cycle to the beat. So this time dilation thing is something that people are playing with a lot actually in VR because it's really interesting to play around with time, especially when you can move things around, and then the physics they follow increases, you're throwing something in slow motion, then the time speeds up and goes. There's some really interesting ways to play with it, but this is one way, which is the actual speed of the animation, which is just one direct kind of from 2D to 3D kind of transition, is how fast it goes through all the keyframes. There's one that creates a fast Fourier transform along lines, so it's the square levels, and then basically a lot of these things are basically perpendicular to the direction of the paint. Is how you get creative, but not all of them, right? Which is the crazy part. So when you paint things, it'll either have squares that come out from the center, or it'll have lights. But yeah, one of the biggest things is you might be able to even have even more control over the rotation of wide scale kind of paints, where you can change the rotation of the thing in the center or whatever, or at some point, and that affects the length of lines along your coil or whatever. There's some really interesting things. Also, you can change color to the beats. Kind of one of the easiest, I think, to implement is you just change the texture. But yeah, the biggest limitation right now in audio reactive brushes and tilt brushes, there's no kind of frequency spectrum. There's no control over that. But honestly, that's once they fix that, they'll have a huge limit, and then hopefully there's somebody develops some tools to create these brushes. Because right now all we have is the ones they've given us, which look awesome, right? But I'm sure they would get old pretty fast if we took this kind of medium seriously. they're like, oh yeah, they did that audio reactive brush. So like if there was a way to develop your own audio reactive brushes easily as a content creator, that would be cool. I wouldn't do it. I'd ask my visual person to do it, my artist. But still, it's a great way to, if you implement these audio reactive like 3D models well, there's a real chance for like a really interesting kind of, because you can move your head and you can go around, it's like, whoa, it's changing color kind of thing. But yeah, so audio reactive things. Kind of, tilt brush is the primary thing that we've got for that right now. Maybe there will be more. I can't say. So that is my presentation on audio reactive brushes.
Cool.
I'm gonna go turn this off.
Great. This is very interesting because I know very